The magnetic storm hit like a fist through reality itself, tearing Dane Kohler's ship from subspace with enough force to crack 3 ribs and paint the interior with sparks. The wandering coin screamed, actually screamed, its hull resonating at frequencies that made his teeth ache, as Calanth 7's gravitational field seized them and dragged them down through layers of frozen atmosphere. Dane had exactly enough time to think, well, this is embarrassing, before the crash webbing deployed and the world became a symphony of grinding metal and his own creative cursing. The ship didn't so much land as give up on flying. They hit ice, skipped like a stone across frozen water, then plowed through what might have been a crystalline forest before finally wedging themselves between 2 obsidian ridges. The sudden silence afterward felt obscene, broken only by the hiss of dying systems and Dane's ragged breathing. Okay, he said to nobody, because talking to yourself in a crashed ship was either good luck or the first sign of space madness, and right now he'd take either. Could have been worse. Could have been on fire. He paused, sniffing. We're not on fire, right? The emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in sickly amber. Dane unclipped from the crash webbing and immediately regretted standing. His ribs informed him they had opinions about sudden movement, all of them negative. He limped toward the cockpit's rear hatch, already running survival calculations in his head. The wandering coin was a Helix-class freighter, which meant she was built tough but heated like garbage. The main core was probably shattered, and without it, the environmental systems would give him maybe 2 hours before hypothermia became a serious concern. The cargo hold was worse than he'd imagined. The entire starboard side had peeled open like a synthetic fruit, exposing the interior to Calanth 7's atmosphere. Wind howled through the gap, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Dane's breath immediately crystallized, adding to the growing frost on every surface. Most of his cargo, black market medical supplies bound for a mining colony that didn't ask questions, had scattered across the ice outside. And there, among the wreckage and emergency foam, was something he definitely hadn't loaded. The stasis pod was wedged between 2 shipping containers, its surface covered in frost but still humming with residual power. Dane approached it slowly, mind racing. Stasis pods meant people, and people in his cargo hold meant complications. Slavers. Political refugees. Someone's extremely delayed package. He wiped frost from the viewing port and his heart performed an interesting acrobatic maneuver. The woman inside looked human, almost. Her face was serene in suspension, features delicate and somehow sharper than any baseline human he'd known. Dark hair floated around her head in the stasis gel. But it was her ears that stopped him cold, long, elegant curves that swept back from her skull, tapering to points that seemed almost decorative in their perfection. They gave her an otherworldly quality that no amount of genetic modification could achieve. "Oh, you're going to be so much paperwork," Dane muttered. The pod's display showed critical failure in 3 languages he could read and 2 he couldn't. Stasis was collapsing. He had maybe 10 minutes before the occupant either woke up or died, and he wasn't sure which option complicated his life more. Dane slapped the emergency release. The pod hissed, cracked along its seams, and began draining gel in thick streams that immediately started freezing on the deck. The woman convulsed once, twice, then her eyes snapped open, irises like brushed bronze, pupils contracting in the dim light. She looked at him, looked at the destroyed cargo hold, looked back at him with an expression of profound confusion. Then she said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes falling downstairs. "Right, okay, Universal Translator." Dane tapped his ear implant. "Give me a second, the crash probably knocked something loose. Usually works on anything with a linguistic matrix." She spoke again, slower this time, and the translator caught fragments: location, damage, protocol violation. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you were in my cargo hold, but we've got bigger problems." Dane gestured at the gaping hole in the hull. "This moon is colder than a tax collector's heart, and our heating just went critical. We need shelter, supplies, and probably a miracle." The woman pulled herself from the pod with surprising grace, gel sliding off her strange clothing, some kind of iridescent fabric that seemed to shift colors in the emergency lighting. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, and moved with the careful precision of someone assessing their surroundings for threats. Her gaze swept across the wreckage, pausing on the exposed ice fields visible through the whole breach. When she looked back at Dane, something in her expression had changed. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. "Callanth 7, she said, and the translator finally caught up. "You have crashed us on Callanth 7. Oh, so you know where we are. That's wonderful. Any chance you know where the nearest heated resort is? I could really use a hot meal and an explanation for why I'm smuggling passengers I didn't agree to smuggle." She tilted her head, ears shifting slightly, an expression he couldn't read. "Humor. You use humor when threatened. Interesting psychological defense. Not threatened, just freezing. There's a difference." Dane moved to a supply locker, pulling out emergency gear. "What's your name? Or species? Or literally any information that helps me figure out what to do with you." "Ares." She watched him work, those bronze eyes tracking every movement. "I am Ares of the 3rd Fleet, and I was not cargo. I was cargo protection. Your shipment required discreet transport through contested space. News to me. You were not meant to know." Ares stepped closer, and Dane noticed she wasn't shivering despite the temperature. "The contract was arranged through intermediaries. Standard protocol for sensitive materials. The medical supplies." Dane laughed, immediately regretted it when his ribs complained. "Those were basic antibiotics and bone knitters. What's sensitive about that?" Ares's expression suggested he was missing something obvious. Before she could explain, the ship's emergency system chimed a warning that made Dane's stomach drop. "Core breach in 60 seconds. Temperature regulation offline. Hull integrity at 40%. Fantastic." Dane grabbed 2 packs, started throwing supplies into them. "Ares of the 3rd Fleet, I hope you're good at camping, because we're about to get very intimate with survival protocols." She moved to the hull breach, placing one hand against the ice-covered metal. Her fingers spread, and for a moment Dane could have sworn he saw patterns of light trace across her palm. When she turned back, her expression was grim. "There is a structure. 3 kilometers northeast, carved into the obsidian ridge." She pointed into the storm. "We can reach it before full night falls." "How do you know what, never mind. Mysterious knowledge of random frozen moons is exactly the kind of skill I need right now." Dane shouldered his pack. "Lead the way, and if we survive this, you're buying the drinks." Ares moved toward the breach, then paused. She looked back at him with something that might have been amusement. "Your species," she said, "talks too much when afraid. And your species has really great hearing, apparently." Dane followed her into the storm. "This is going to be a long walk." The wind cut through Dane's thermal suit like it was made of optimistic thoughts and broken promises. 3 steps into the ice storm and he'd already lost feeling in his face. 10 steps and he was genuinely questioning every life choice that had led him to this frozen hell. 20 steps and Ares looked back at him with an expression that managed to convey both concern and mild disappointment in his species' survival capabilities. "You're moving slowly," she observed, her voice somehow cutting through the howl of wind without her needing to shout. "I'm moving at standard human freezing-to-death pace," Dane called back. "This is actually pretty good for us fragile types." Ares waited for him to catch up, and he noticed something odd. The storm seemed to bend around her, snow and ice crystals sliding past her body rather than accumulating on her clothing. That iridescent fabric of hers rippled with faint light, creating a pocket of relatively calm air in the chaos. "Is that thing generating a field?" He gestured at her outfit. "Thermal displacement matrix. Standard issue for deep space reconnaissance." She started walking again, slower this time, letting him keep pace. "Your technology hasn't developed personal environmental shields." "We have them. I just couldn't afford one on a smuggler's salary. Dane stumbled over a ridge of ice, caught himself. Spent all my credits on a ship with great storage capacity and terrible heating. Really nailed my priorities there. The landscape was alien in ways that made his brain hurt. Ice formations twisted into impossible spirals, reflecting the dim light of Calent 7's distant sun through internal crystalline structures. The obsidian ridge Ares had mentioned loomed ahead, black as a void against the white storm, its surface too smooth to be natural geology. How do you know about that structure? Dane asked, partly from curiosity and partly to keep his mind off the cold seeping through his boots. Ares was quiet for several steps. My people surveyed this system 200 cycles ago. Before your species achieved faster-than-light travel. Before the trade routes brought others here. 200 years and nobody mentioned the convenient cave system to galactic cartography. We don't share everything we find. She glanced back at him, ears twitching. Do humans? Fair point. We're pretty good at keeping secrets. Usually the profitable kind. Dane's teeth were chattering now despite his thermal suit's best efforts. Though right now I'd trade every secret I know for a functioning heater. They reached the obsidian ridge after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Up close, the rock face was covered in patterns that made Dane's eyes water when he tried to focus on them. Geometric shapes that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally, suggesting dimensions his visual cortex wasn't equipped to process. Ares placed her palm flat against the stone. Her hand glowed with soft bioluminescence, light spreading from her fingers into the patterns carved in the rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone sang. It was a low, resonant hum that Dane felt in his bones, a frequency that made his ribs stop aching and his head feel strange and light. The patterns blazed with sudden brilliance, and a section of the obsidian face simply slid aside, revealing a passage that exhaled warmer air. Okay, that was objectively cool, Dane said. Terrifying, but cool. Are you going to tell me what that was, or should I just add it to the growing list of mysteries? Biometric lock keyed to my genetic signature. Ares stepped into the passage, and dim lights flickered to life along the walls. This way station was built by my people. We expected to return. The passage descended at a gentle angle, walls covered in more of those reality-bending patterns. The temperature rose quickly, going from lethal to merely uncomfortable. Dane's frozen extremities began to thaw, bringing with them the exquisite agony of returning circulation. So what happened? Why didn't your people come back? He followed her deeper, watching bioluminescent moss begin to appear along the ceiling, glowing in shades of blue and violet. Ares's ears flattened slightly against her skull. War. Internal conflict over expansion policy. Some wanted to make contact with emerging species like yours. Others believed in observation without interference. The debate became violent. The passage opened into a chamber that took Dane's breath away. It was vast, carved from solid obsidian, with pillars of crystalline formations reaching from floor to ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Ancient machinery lined the walls, covered in dust but still humming with dormant power. In the center stood what looked like a control nexus, its holographic displays long since faded. This is incredible, Dane breathed. How many of these did your people build? Hundreds. Across dozens of systems. Ares moved to the control nexus, her fingers dancing across surfaces that responded to her touch with cascades of light. Most are probably forgotten now. Lost to time and conflict. Dane set down his pack, flexing his fingers as feeling returned. The chamber was warmer but still far from comfortable, maybe just above freezing. He could see his breath, watch it drift upward into the vast darkness above where the ceiling disappeared. Ares made a frustrated sound, something between a sigh and a musical note. The primary heating system is offline. Catastrophic failure, probably centuries ago. I can activate emergency thermal units but they're not designed for extended use. How long will they last? Perhaps 12 hours. Maybe less. She turned to him, and her expression was grave. This moon's night cycle lasts 72 hours. We crashed near the end of the day period. So we're going to freeze anyway, just slower and with better ambience. Dane laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the chamber. My luck is really consistent, I'll give it that. Ares coaxed a panel open, revealing a heating element that looked disturbingly corroded. With careful manipulation, she got it glowing, casting orange light across the obsidian walls. The warmth was immediate but clearly inadequate for the space. We should establish camp near the heater. Conserve what heat we can. She was already pulling out salvaged materials from her pack, arranging them with methodical efficiency. Dane joined her, setting up their meager supplies. One sleeping bag between them. Emergency rations that were probably older than some civilizations. A water reclamation unit that worked on principles he didn't want to think about too hard. You know, when I imagined my exciting smuggler life, it involved more dramatic space chases and less hypothermia. He tried to activate a portable cooking unit, got nothing but a sad beep. Also better equipment. Why is everything breaking today? Calanth 7's magnetic field interferes with most standard technology. Ares pulled out a device from her clothing, something that looked like a crystalline sphere. When she activated it, holographic star charts bloomed in the air above them, showing their position in the sector. We're 17 days from the nearest shipping lane at standard drive speeds. The magnetic interference makes long-range communication impossible. Dane studied the charts, his chest tightening with more than just bruised ribs. So we're stuck here. In a cave. On a frozen moon. With one sleeping bag and a heater that's probably going to die in the middle of the night. Yes. Ares met his gaze directly. An accurate assessment of our situation. Just checking. Wanted to make sure I hadn't missed any silver linings in there. He sat down near the heater, feeling the warmth on his face. At least we're not being chased by pirates. That would make this day perfect. Ares sat across from him, folding her legs in a way that seemed too precise to be comfortable. You use humor as a psychological buffer against fear. I've read about this human trait. It's considered adaptive. It's either joke or panic, and panic burns too many calories. Dane pulled out an emergency ration bar, offered her one. You hungry? These taste like recycled cardboard but they keep you alive. She accepted it, examining the packaging with scientific curiosity. My metabolism is different from yours. I can process a wider range of organic materials. But this is adequate. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of dying machinery and the distant howl of wind through the cave system. Dane watched Ares as she studied their surroundings, her ears constantly moving, tracking sounds he couldn't hear. She seemed utterly calm, as if being stranded on a frozen moon was just another Tuesday. Can I ask you something? Dane said finally. You already are asking. Smart ass. I like that. He grinned. Why were you really in that stasis pod? And don't give me the cargo protection line. Medical supplies don't need an armed escort with genetic door keys. Ares was quiet for a long moment, her bronze eyes reflecting the heater's orange glow. I was exiled. Political disagreement with my fleet's doctrine. The stasis pod was meant to take me to a neutral station where I could await tribunal. The ship carrying me was attacked. Your vessel salvaged the pod from the wreckage. So I accidentally rescued you. Accidentally acquired me as contraband, technically. She almost smiled. But rescue is an acceptable interpretation. Great. So I'm a smuggler and an accidental hero. That's going on my resume. Dane lay back, staring up into darkness. What did you disagree about? The policy thing? Whether emerging species should be contacted or observed. I believed in making ourselves known. Offering knowledge and partnership. My superiors preferred shadows and study. Her voice carried an edge of old anger. They called it protection. I called it arrogance. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're the talkative type. Being stranded with someone who refuses to explain alien door locks would be annoying. The heater's glow was already dimming. Dane could feel the cold creeping back into the chamber, patient and inevitable. Ares noticed too, her expression shifting into something analytical and slightly worried. We should rest while we can, she said. The temperature will drop significantly once the night cycle fully begins. Dane nodded, too tired and cold to argue. He pulled the sleeping bag closer to the heater, already dreading how inadequate it was going to be. Ares helped him arrange their insulation, her movements efficient and strangely gentle. Hey Ares. Dane said as they settled in. Thanks for the cave. Beats freezing outside. You're welcome, Dane Kohler. She positioned herself near the heater, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Try to sleep. Tomorrow we plan our survival. Right. Survival planning. My favorite. He closed his eyes, but sleep felt very far away. The cold was already finding ways through their defenses, and the night had only just begun. Dane woke to the sound of his own teeth chattering. Not the gentle kind of cold that makes you pull a blanket closer, but the bone-deep chill that turns your body into a percussion instrument of survival instincts. His fingers were numb. His toes had apparently filed for divorce from his nervous system. And his breath hung in the air like tiny ghosts mocking his poor life choices. The heater was dead. Completely, utterly, tragically dead. Well, he said to the darkness, this is suboptimal. Movement beside him. Ares sat up from where she'd been positioned near the heating unit, and even in the dim glow of bioluminescent moss, Dane could see she was trembling. Subtle vibrations that ran through her frame in waves, her iridescent clothing pulsing with faint light as if trying to compensate for the temperature drop. You're cold, Dane observed through chattering teeth. I didn't think that was possible for your species. I can survive longer than you in these conditions. Survive is not the same as comfortable. Ares pulled her knees to her chest, ears flat against her skull. My core temperature is dropping slower than yours, but it is dropping. The heating element failed approximately 47 minutes ago. Dane checked his suit's internal readout and immediately wished he hadn't. Ambient temperature was -32 degrees and falling. His suit was rated for -20 for short durations. They had, optimistically, maybe 3 hours before hypothermia became a serious medical emergency rather than just extremely unpleasant. Okay, so we need a plan. He tried to stand, found his muscles had opinions about that, all of them negative. There's got to be another heating unit in this place. Your people wouldn't build a way station with only one backup system. They would if they expected regular maintenance and resupply. Ares was staring at her hands, watching them shake. This facility was designed for short-term occupation by personnel with environmental suits. Not extended survival scenarios. Of course not. That would be too convenient. Dane managed to get to his feet, immediately began pacing to generate body heat. What about your suit thing? The thermal displacement matrix. Can you boost it, share the field? It's not a heat generator. It redirects thermal energy, creates a buffer zone. With no ambient warmth to redistribute, it's essentially ornamental. She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Dane saw something like fear in her bronze eyes. I am sorry. I brought you to shelter that cannot shelter us. Hey, no. Stop that. Dane crouched beside her, his knees cracking in protest. This is still better than freezing outside. We've got walls, we've got each other, and we've got whatever survival instincts got us this far. He forced a grin. Plus I've got at least 3 more terrible jokes left in me before I succumb to the elements. That's got to count for something. Ares tilted her head, ears twitching slightly. Humor again. You're literally freezing to death and you make jokes. It's called coping mechanisms. Very advanced human technology. Dane rubbed his arms, trying to generate friction warmth. Although I'm open to suggestions from the advanced alien with the genetic door keys. She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she stood with sudden purpose, moving to the sleeping bag they'd set up. She examined it with analytical precision, then turned to face him with an expression that was carefully neutral. There is one option. It's not ideal, but it utilizes basic thermodynamic principles that work regardless of technology. I'm listening. Preferably quickly, before my ears fall off. Body heat sharing. Humans generate approximately 100 watts of thermal energy at rest. My species generates approximately 140 watts, with more efficient retention. In an insulated environment, two bodies in direct contact can maintain viable core temperatures significantly longer than separate. Dane blinked. You're suggesting we huddle for warmth. I'm suggesting we optimize our thermal resources through proximity and shared insulation. Ares gestured at the sleeping bag. The mathematics are sound. Separately, you have perhaps 2 hours before critical hypothermia. Together, we could maintain viable temperatures for 8 to 10 hours. And then what? And then we hope Calanth 7's day cycle returns before we freeze anyway. She met his gaze steadily. It's not a solution. It's a delay. But delay means time, and time means possibility. Dane laughed, the sound escaping before he could stop it. So our brilliant survival plan is to spoon in a sleeping bag and hope for morning. This is either the most practical thing I've ever done or the weirdest first date in galactic history. I don't understand the reference to courtship rituals, but yes, essentially. Ares began arranging the sleeping bag, pulling it closer to the residual warmth where the heater had been. For maximum efficiency, we need direct skin contact. Your thermal suit is designed for insulation, which works against heat sharing. You'll need to remove the outer layers. Of course I will. Because this day wasn't awkward enough already. Dane started unsealing his thermal suit, immediately regretting it as the cold hit his inner layers. Just so we're clear, this is purely survival-based contact. Professional freezing together. Very businesslike. Obviously. Ares was removing her iridescent outer garment, revealing an inner layer that looked like metallic mesh. I feel compelled to note that my species doesn't share warmth casually. This level of physical proximity carries social implications in my culture. What kind of implications? The kind that suggest trust. Partnership. Willingness to be vulnerable. She folded her garment carefully. We don't touch strangers this way. Well, good news. We've been through a crash together and taken a lovely hike through a death storm. I think we're past strangers. Dane stripped down to his inner thermal layer, already shivering violently. Although if we survive this, you're definitely explaining your culture's personal space rules in detail. For future reference. Agreed. Now get in the sleeping bag before you lose more core temperature. Dane climbed into the bag, gasping as the cold material touched his skin. Ares followed, and he tried not to think too hard about the logistics of two people in a space designed for one. She moved with clinical efficiency, positioning them so his back pressed against her front, her arms wrapping around his torso, one of her legs hooked over his. The warmth was immediate and shocking. Ares's body temperature was significantly higher than human standard, and heat radiated from her like she'd swallowed a small sun. Dane gasped as sensation flooded back into his extremities, the contrast between freezing and warm so intense it was almost painful. Your heart rate just spiked, Ares observed, her voice close to his ear. Adrenaline response or circulatory shock from rapid temperature change? Little of both. Maybe throw in some embarrassment for flavor. Dane forced himself to breathe steadily. You're really warm. Like, concerningly warm. Is that normal for your species? Yes. We evolved on a world with extreme temperature variations. Efficient heat generation and retention was adaptive. Her breath was warm against his neck. Your species is inefficient. You lose heat through your extremities, your head, even your lungs with every breath. It's remarkable you survived to develop spaceflight. We're scrappy. Make up for poor thermal regulation with stubbornness and spite. Dane could feel her heartbeat against his back, slower than human standard but strong. This is working though. I can feel my toes again. Not happy toes, but present toes. Good. Maintain this position. Try to sleep if possible. Rest reduces caloric burn and heat loss. Sleep. Right. Because this isn't the most bizarre situation I've ever been in. But even as he said it, Dane could feel exhaustion pulling at him. The adrenaline from the crash was wearing off, the cold had sapped his energy, and Ares's warmth was making his body remember it hadn't slept in almost 20 hours. Dane. Ares's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Yeah. Thank you for not panicking. Many humans would have been less rational about our circumstances. Who says I'm not panicking? This could all be elaborate panic disguised as competence. He shifted slightly, finding a more comfortable position. Besides, you're the one who found the cave and knows how to work alien door locks. I'm just along for the ride. You crashed on this moon. Survived. Pulled me from stasis. Crossed a killing storm. These are not accomplishments of someone merely along for the ride. Dane was quiet for a moment, oddly touched by the observation. Well, when you put it that way, I sound almost heroic. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation as a mediocre smuggler. He felt more than heard Ares's laugh, a vibration that resonated through her chest into his back. It was a strange sound, melodic and crystalline, unlike human laughter but conveying the same amusement. Your species is very strange, she said. You face death with jokes and deflection. It's inefficient but somehow endearing. Endearing. I'll take it. Dane closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Hey Ares. What's your world like? The one with the singing crystals and temperature extremes? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, beautiful. And gone. The Civil War rendered it uninhabitable. Too many weapons, too much destruction. The crystals stopped singing 40 cycles ago. I'm sorry. So am I. Her arms tightened around him slightly. But dwelling on loss serves no survival function. We focus on the present. On staying alive until dawn. Practical and depressing. You're good at that. But Dane's voice was gentle. He understood loss, understood the way it could hollow you out if you let it. For what it's worth, if we make it out of this, I know some decent worlds. Ones that still sing, in their own ways. I could show you. Payment for the life-saving warmth. That would be acceptable. Ares shifted, adjusting their position to maximize heat retention. Now sleep. I'll monitor our core temperatures. You're going to watch me sleep. Not creepy at all. I'm going to ensure you don't die. Significant difference. Fair point. Dane let himself relax, his body finally accepting that it wasn't in immediate danger of freezing. Ares's presence was oddly comforting, her warmth and steady heartbeat creating a bubble of safety in the frozen darkness. Wake me if anything interesting happens. Rescue ships, sudden volcanic activity, whatever. I will wake you if we're about to die. Even better. Love a good death warning. But his words were already slurring with exhaustion. The cold was still there, waiting beyond their small pocket of shared warmth, but for now they were alive. Together. Two strangers from different worlds, keeping each other breathing through nothing more than proximity and determination. It wasn't much of a plan, but on Calanth 7, in the dead of night, it was enough. Dane woke to warmth and the unsettling realization that he'd never been more comfortable while simultaneously being more screwed. Ares was still wrapped around him, her breathing slow and steady, her body radiating heat like a personal star. His head felt clearer, his extremities functional, and he could move his fingers without wanting to scream. All victories, however small. The problem was everything outside their sleeping bag cocoon wanted them dead. He could hear the wind howling through the cave system, a sound like the universe clearing its throat before delivering bad news. The bioluminescent moss had dimmed to barely a flicker, suggesting even it was conserving energy against the cold. The ambient temperature had to be pushing -40 by now. "You're awake," Ares murmured against his shoulder blade. Your breathing pattern changed. Respiration increased by approximately 12%. Do you monitor everything? Survival requires observation. Also, you snore. Lightly, but consistently. Frequency suggests minor respiratory obstruction. Dane laughed quietly. Thanks for the medical evaluation. Really building my confidence here. You're welcome. She shifted slightly, and Dane felt her fingers press against his ribs where he'd been injured. Your inflammation has decreased. Accelerated healing, probably shock-induced endorphins masking residual pain. Or your magical alien warmth has healing properties. I'm choosing to believe that because it sounds cooler. Not magic. Thermodynamics. But her tone carried something that might have been amusement. How do you feel? Alive. Confused. Hungry. In that order. Dane tried to shift position, found they'd somehow become more entangled during sleep. Also extremely aware that we've been using each other as blankets for several hours and my leg has fallen asleep. Ares untangled herself with efficient grace, though Dane noticed she didn't pull away entirely. Smart survival instinct. They couldn't afford to lose the heat they'd built up. She reached past him to grab her crystalline device, activated it with a touch that made it glow softly. The holographic display showed time elapsed and external temperature readings that made Dane's stomach drop. We've been asleep for 6 hours, Ares said. External temperature is -43 degrees. The night cycle has approximately 66 hours remaining. So we've survived almost 10% of the death period. Fantastic progress. Dane rubbed his face, felt the scratch of 2 days' worth of stubble. Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us staying in this sleeping bag for the next 2.5 days. I have several plans. None of them are good. Ares pulled up another holographic display, showing a schematic of the way station. There are 3 other chambers in this facility. One was a medical bay, one a data archive, one a power distribution center. Any of them might have functional systems we can cannibalize. Might have. Love that certainty. The facility is 200 cycles old and unmaintained. Certainty is a luxury. She gestured at the schematic, highlighting a path through the cave system. The medical bay is closest. Approximately 300 meters from our current position. If we move quickly, we can minimize exposure. Define quickly when we're talking about temperatures that can kill you in minutes. Ares was quiet for a moment, her ears flicking in what Dane was learning to recognize as uncertainty. We would need to stay in physical contact. Share body heat while moving. The thermal displacement field from my clothing can extend to cover one additional person if they remain within 20 centimeters. So we shuffle through frozen tunnels while hugging. This day just keeps getting better. Dane started pulling on his thermal suit layers, immediately regretting the loss of warmth. What are we hoping to find in the medical bay? Stasis units. Emergency thermal blankets. Possibly functional power cells we can repurpose. She was dressing as well, moving with that precise efficiency. At minimum, better insulation than we currently have. And at maximum, a functional medical pod we can shelter in until the day cycle returns. Dane sealed his suit, already feeling the cold creeping back into his bones. That actually sounds reasonable. Which means something will definitely go wrong. It's been that kind of week. They packed their minimal supplies, Dane moving slowly to conserve energy and avoid aggravating his ribs. Ares watched him with clinical attention, occasionally adjusting his gear with corrections he hadn't known he needed. "You've done this before," he observed. "The survival thing. Not your first time keeping someone alive in terrible conditions. Military training includes extensive survival protocols. I've completed tours on 17 different hostile worlds." She handed him an emergency light stick, showed him how to activate it with pressure rather than power. "Though I've never been stranded with a human before. Your species presents unique challenges. We're delicate flowers. Very high maintenance." Dane cracked the light stick, watched it glow with pale blue luminescence. "What's the worst world you survived on?" "Kethra, 9. Ammonia atmosphere, sulfuric rain, carnivorous geology." Ares moved to the chamber entrance, checking the passage beyond. "I was there for 47 days with a broken communicator and limited supplies. Lost 2 team members to the environment. That's horrific. I'm sorry. It taught me that survival is about adaptation and accepting help when offered." She looked back at him, her bronze eyes reflecting the light stick's glow. "Which is why I'm telling you, when we move through those tunnels, stay close to me. If you feel yourself getting too cold, speak immediately. Pride is not worth freezing for. Got it? Check my ego at the door, embrace the buddy system." Dane moved to join her at the entrance. "Ready when you are." The passage beyond their chamber was darker and significantly colder. Frost covered every surface, creating crystalline patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't also deadly. Ares activated her thermal displacement field, and Dane felt the immediate difference, a pocket of slightly less lethal air surrounding them both. They moved together, Dane's arm around Ares's waist, her arm across his shoulders. It was awkward and intimate and absolutely necessary. The field only extended so far, and any distance between them meant exposure to temperatures that could damage tissue in seconds. "This is extremely undignified," Dane muttered as they shuffled forward. "Dignity is for people who aren't freezing." Ares guided them around a corner, her free hand trailing along the wall. "Watch your footing. Ice accumulation makes the floor unstable." They walked in silence for several minutes, their breath creating small clouds that dissipated quickly in the cold. Dane could feel the temperature trying to kill him, pressing against the thermal field like a living thing. His suit's internal readout was screaming warnings he was trying very hard to ignore. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, partly to distract himself from the cold. "You may ask. I may not answer." "Fair. Why were you really exiled? The policy disagreement thing feels incomplete." Ares was quiet for several steps. "I made contact with a human colony against direct orders. Shared technology. Warned them about a resource conflict that would have destroyed their settlement. My superiors believed I violated the observation protocols. Endangered our secrecy for sentiment. You saved lives. I broke regulations. In military structure, the distinction matters." Her voice carried old frustration. "They called it a trial, but the verdict was predetermined. Exile until I learned to follow doctrine without question. That's some bureaucratic nonsense right there." Dane felt a spike of anger on her behalf. "You did the right thing and got punished for it. The right thing is often inconvenient for those in power." Ares stopped, checked her device. "The medical bay should be through this next junction. Stay alert." They rounded the corner and Dane's heart sank. The passage ahead had partially collapsed, ice and rock blocking most of the way. There was a gap, maybe half a meter wide, that showed darkness beyond. "We can fit through that," Ares said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Can we fit through that while maintaining physical contact in a thermal death zone? We'll have to try sequentially. I go first, you follow immediately." The gap is only 3 meters long. Exposure time should be minimal. Should be. Those words again. But Dane was already moving toward the gap. You know what? Let's do it. Worst case scenario, I become a very photogenic ice sculpture. That's not funny. Little bit funny. Gallows humor is still humor. He watched Ares squeeze through the gap, her slim frame navigating the tight space with practiced efficiency. Then she was through, reaching back through the opening. Quickly now. Don't hesitate. Dane took a breath and pushed into the gap. Immediately, the cold hit him like a physical blow. The thermal field was on the other side, and he was exposed to the full fury of Calanth VII's night. Ice scraped against his suit. His breath froze in his lungs. His fingers went numb in seconds. Then Ares's hand closed around his wrist and pulled. He stumbled through the gap, crashed into her, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. The thermal field enveloped them again, blessed warmth cutting through the cold shock. That was terrible, Dane gasped. 0 stars. Would not recommend. You're through. That's what matters. Ares helped him up, her hands checking his suit for damage. No tears. Good. Can you feel your extremities? Fingers hurt. Toes hurt. Face hurts. So yes, I can feel them. He flexed his hands, watching sensation return in painful tingles. Let's find this medical bay before we have to do that again. The medical bay door was 20 meters ahead, marked with symbols that glowed faintly in their light stick's illumination. Ares approached it, placed her hand on the access panel, and waited while the ancient systems tried to recognize her biometrics. The door slid open with a grinding sound that echoed through the tunnels. Beyond lay a chamber filled with equipment that had been state-of-the-art 200 years ago and now looked like artifacts from a museum. But in the corner, still humming with residual power, was a medical stasis pod. Its display showed minimal functionality, backup power at 30%, but it was working. Oh, thank God, Dane breathed. Please tell me that thing generates heat. It maintains stable internal temperatures for patient care. Not designed for shelter, but it should work. Ares moved to the pod, began running diagnostics. We can both fit if we compress. The pod will maintain 22 degrees Celsius indefinitely on its current power reserves. That's practically tropical. I love it. I'm moving in. Dane was already at the pod, examining its interior. How long until we can get in? System needs 5 minutes to purge and reset. Ares was typing commands into interfaces that responded sluggishly. But yes, we can shelter here. Wait out the night cycle in relative comfort. Relative comfort beats freezing any day. Dane slumped against the pod, letting himself feel the exhaustion that had been chasing him. Ares? Thanks for not letting me die. I know I joke a lot, but seriously. You've kept me alive through some impressive nonsense. She looked at him, ears twitching in that way he was learning meant emotional processing. You've adapted well. Most humans would have panicked or made critical errors. You've been competent. Competent. That's going on my headstone. Here lies Dane Kohler, he was competent. Better than most epitaphs. The pod chimed, signaling ready status. Come. Let's get inside before something else goes wrong. Don't jinx it. But Dane was already climbing into the pod, Ares following close behind. They arranged themselves in the cramped space, similar to the sleeping bag but with more room and the promise of controlled temperature. The pod sealed with a hiss, and blessed warmth began flooding the interior. Dane closed his eyes, felt his body finally start to relax. You know, he said drowsily, if we survive this, I'm never complaining about warm weather again. Noted. Ares settled against him, her warmth now comfortable rather than desperately necessary. Rest now. We're safe for the moment. Safe. It was a relative term on Calanth 7, but right now, in this pod, with warmth and shelter and someone who'd proven reliable in crisis, Dane decided it was enough. Dane woke to sound. Not the howl of wind or the creak of dying machinery, but something deeper, rhythmic, powerful. A thrumming that resonated through the medical pod's walls and into his chest cavity. He opened his eyes to find Ares already awake, her body tense, ears swiveling to track the source. "Tell me that's not another catastrophic system failure," he said. "It's not." Her voice carried something he hadn't heard before, uncertainty mixed with recognition. "It's a ship. Descending through atmosphere." Dane's brain took a moment to process that. A ship. Here. On the frozen death moon we crashed on. Yes. Ares was already moving, opening the pod with careful precision. The medical bay was still cold but survivable, their body heat and the pod systems having raised the ambient temperature to something merely unpleasant. "The signature matches my people's vessels. Heavy cruiser class, search configuration. Your people." Dane climbed out after her, his ribs protesting but manageable. "The ones who exiled you. Coming here. That's either really good or spectacularly bad. Both simultaneously." Ares moved to the medical bay's ancient equipment, coaxing a display to life. It showed external sensors, barely functional, but enough to confirm a massive ship settling onto the ice fields near the Obsidian Ridge. "They're searching for survivors of the Civil War. Reconciliation efforts, probably. Or cleanup operations." Optimistic and pessimistic. "I like the range." Dane watched the display, saw the ship's landing lights cutting through the perpetual twilight. "So what's the play? We go out there waving and hope they're the forgiving type?" Ares was quiet, staring at the display with an expression Dane couldn't quite read. "They'll take me home. Back to my fleet, my culture. There will be questions, debriefing, possibly another tribunal given that I'm still technically exiled. But you'll be warm and not dead. Solid upgrade from our current situation." "Yes." She turned to look at him then, and Dane saw conflict written across her features. "But you're a human smuggler with no legal standing in my people's jurisdiction. They may view you as a security concern. Or worse, evidence that I violated contact protocols again by working with you." "Working with me? We crashed together. Froze together. Spooned for survival. That's not working together, that's shared trauma bonding." Dane ran a hand through his hair, trying to think through the implications. "What happens to me if they decide I'm a problem?" "Detention. Interrogation. Eventually released to human authorities, but the timeline would be indefinite." Ares moved closer, her bronze eyes fixed on his. "I won't let them harm you. You saved my life, kept me alive. In my culture, that creates obligation." "Obligation. Great. I love being someone's responsibility." But Dane's tone was gentle, teasing. "Look, you do what you need to do. If going home means dealing with some bureaucratic hassle about the stray human, I can handle it. Better than freezing." The thrumming grew louder. Figures were moving on the ice outside, visible through the medical bay's frosted viewing port. Tall, elegant forms in environmental suits, carrying equipment that glowed with soft bioluminescence. "Search teams, systematic and efficient. They'll find us soon," Ares said. "The way station's power signature will draw them here. Then we should probably make ourselves presentable. I'm guessing half-frozen smuggler in borrowed alien cave isn't the first impression I want to make." Dane started gathering their supplies, such as they were. "Any cultural protocols I should know? Special hand gestures? Avoid eye contact? Not mention the spooning? Definitely don't mention the warmth sharing." Ares was pulling on her iridescent outer garment, smoothing it with careful hands. "In my culture, that level of physical intimacy suggests partnership formation. It would complicate explanations significantly. Partnership formation. Like, what, we're engaged now by alien law. Not engaged. But indicating serious intention toward bonding. It's considered a preliminary declaration of compatibility and trust. She glanced at him, ears twitching with what might have been embarrassment. Normally there are formal processes. Introductions, family approvals, compatibility assessments. What we did, sharing warmth, sleeping together for survival, that bypasses many steps. Dane laughed, couldn't help it. So I accidentally alien proposed to you by not freezing to death. That's going in the memoir. He sobered slightly, met her gaze. For what it's worth, if we had to do formal compatibility assessments, I think you'd pass. You're competent, you've got great taste in survival caves, and you haven't let me die even once. That's solid partner material. You're making jokes again. I'm always making jokes. But I'm also serious. He moved closer, aware that this might be the last moment they had without witnesses and complications. You saved my life, Ares. Multiple times. And somewhere between the crash and the hypothermia and the awkward sleeping arrangements, I stopped thinking of you as just the mysterious alien in my cargo hold. You're someone I'd want watching my back. In whatever capacity that works. Ares's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Dane to track. You understand what you're suggesting? My people don't form partnerships casually. If I claim you as mine, that carries legal and social weight. It would protect you from detention, but it would bind us together in ways that would be difficult to undo. Bind us how? Shared resources. Mutual responsibility. Expected cohabitation and collaboration. In practical terms, you would become part of my family structure, afforded all protections and obligations that entails. Dane considered that. A week ago, he'd been a lone smuggler with no ties and no plans beyond the next job. Now he was standing in an alien medical bay, contemplating partnership with someone from a species he'd barely known existed. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt oddly right. So I'd get alien health benefits and you'd be stuck with a human who makes bad jokes and crashes ships. Sounds fair. You're certain? Ares stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his face with surprising gentleness. This changes everything, Dane Kohler. Your life, your freedom. Once claimed, you can't simply return to smuggling in solitude. Maybe I'm tired of solitude. Maybe almost freezing to death gave me perspective. He covered her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin. Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting exiled again. Apparently you're terrible at following rules. I am. She smiled then, genuine and warm. And you're terrible at self-preservation. We're both disasters. Perfectly matched disasters. Dane heard voices approaching, saw lights moving through the tunnels. So what happens now? You march out there and declare me your wayward human partner and hope they buy it? Essentially. Ares pulled away, began adjusting his suit with quick, efficient movements. Try to look less like a smuggler and more like someone who could plausibly form a partnership with a military reconnaissance officer. That's a tall order. I look exactly like a smuggler. It's part of my charm. The medical bay door slid open, and 3 figures entered. They were tall, elegant, with the same elongated ears as Ares, dressed in sleek environmental suits that made Dane's gear look like it had been assembled from spare parts. Their eyes, all shades of metallic bronze and silver, swept across the scene with analytical precision. One of them spoke, the language flowing like music, and Dane's translator struggled to keep up. Officer Ares. We received beacon signals from this way station. Are you injured? No. I'm well. Ares straightened, her posture shifting into something more formal. This is Dane Kohler. He's under my protection. We survived a crash together and have formed preliminary partnership bonds. The three figures exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward, studying Dane with uncomfortable intensity. A human. You're claiming partnership with a human? Yes. Ares moved to stand beside Dane, her hand finding his. He saved my life. Maintained my survival through extreme conditions. The bonds were naturally formed through shared adversity. That's highly irregular. Most of my career has been irregular. I see no reason to change now. Ares's voice carried steel beneath the melody. Will this be a problem? More exchanged glances. Then the lead figure made a gesture that looked like resignation mixed with respect. No problem. If you claim him, he's afforded full partnership protections under reconciliation protocols. Though you'll both need to undergo formal processing once we return to the fleet. The figure turned to Dane. Can you understand me, human? Yes. Translators catching most of it. Dane squeezed Ares's hand, drew strength from her presence. I appreciate the hospitality. And the not detaining me thing. Thank Officer Ares. Her claim is the only reason you're not in a holding cell right now. But the figure's tone wasn't unkind. Come. Both of you. The ship has medical facilities and heat. You've survived long enough in this frozen hell. They followed the search team through tunnels that felt less threatening now, out into the ice fields where the massive ship waited like a cathedral of light and metal. Dane looked up at it, felt the magnitude of what he'd just agreed to settle over him. Having second thoughts. Ares murmured beside him. Constantly. But I'm also thinking about how boring my life was before I crashed on this moon. He grinned at her. At least now I've got a partner who can operate alien door locks. That's got to be useful. Extremely useful. You have no idea how many doors I can open. They climbed the ramp into warmth and light, into a ship full of Ares's people who stared at the human with curiosity and suspicion in equal measure. But Ares kept her hand in his, her presence steady and certain, and Dane found himself thinking that maybe this was exactly the kind of complication he'd needed. The ship lifted off, leaving Calanth 7's frozen surface behind. Through the viewports, Dane watched the moon shrink to a point of light, then disappear entirely as they accelerated toward destinations unknown. So, he said to Ares, what happens now? Do we get matching uniforms? Secret handshakes? Do I have to meet your family? All of that, eventually. She leaned against him, comfortable in a way that suggested their survival bonding had been more real than either of them had admitted. But first, we find you proper quarters, decent food, and medical attention for those ribs you keep pretending don't hurt. They're fine. They're broken in 2 places. I could feel it when we were sharing warmth. Okay, they're a little broken. But I'm walking. That counts for something. Dane looked at her, at this alien woman who'd kept him alive through impossible circumstances, who'd claimed him as partner to save him from bureaucratic hell, who was now looking at him with something that might have been fondness. Thank you, Ares. For everything. Thank you for not dying. It would have been inconvenient to explain to my superiors. But her eyes were warm, her hand still in his. They moved deeper into the ship, into warmth and safety and a future neither of them had planned. Behind them, Calanth 7 continued its frozen rotation, indifferent to the 2 people who'd survived its worst and found something unexpected in the cold.